Coming up, the preseason is in the books, and we have a handful of takeaways coming out of Saturday's loss to the New York Jets, plus looking at the already initial cuts heading towards 53, who remains on the bubble, who elevated their stock, and what does it look like still, as always, across this offensive line from a depth perspective. We dive in coming up next. Yes, my friend, it's OGP, the One Giant Podcast, where you know that we are your hosts. Over here, Adam Armbrecht, over there, Andrew Makowitz. We're healthy, we're wealthy, we're wise, and we're talking about finally tying a bow on preseason games. Andy, we're going to get into, there's now up to 12 cuts. We're recording on Monday morning. Good chance, as these things kind of come out in chunks, that there'll be some more today before we get to the Tuesday afternoon deadline to get to the 53. But we already have cuts. We already have some maybe inclinations about guys we think have cemented their opportunity for the 53 or damaged their chance to be a part of Big Blue. But we'll start with the game on Saturday night. High-level takeaways, Andy. And I know it never hurts. It never hurts to have a man see the light and come over to my side.
Well, okay, yeah, I would agree, Adam. As we think about this,
I like that we coordinated wearing gray. This is always a positive, I think, look. Really brings up
well,
the energy and the light of the show.
well, for those who are watching us on YouTube right now,
That's right.
when we first started, it looked like I was like pale white, and you had like this beautiful fresh tan from being at the beach, and I didn't really understand what was going on. But listen, I have come over to the bright side over
That's right.
here, and Adam, what the Jets game did for me was change a few things about who I think is going to make the 53-man roster. And remember, every time you add or take one person away, it also impacts another potential position or another player either coming up or coming down. It's not just like,
Right.
oh, I got one thing wrong. It's like, no, if I'm not doing this, then I can do X with my roster spot. And so the first thing that I thought about was watching Tommy DeVito the whole game. I I, I may have to put my hand up and say, I think you were right, Adam. I don't know why we would keep Tommy DeVito on this roster. And there's a couple reasons. One, I watched him get sacked 8 times in this game. They said 2 were credited to him just kind of like getting stuck where he was. 6 were credited to the offensive line. But this is the same thing that happened with Tommy DeVito last year. He was the most sacked quarterback by drop back percentage in the entire NFL last year. And you keep seeing it more and more. And outside of that, Adam, it just brought me to looking around the league, and you see guys like the Miami Dolphins just released Mike White. You got Taylor Heineke is the 3rd string quarterback in Atlanta right now behind Penix and Kirk Cousins. You've got Cleveland that has Dorian Thompson-Robinson. You've got Tyler Huntley there. You've got Jameis Winston all backing up Deshaun Watson. There are names of guys. Ryan Tannehill is still a free agent on the market if you need a quarterback in a pinch. It made me think, is Tommy DeVito definitively better than any of those guys that I mentioned? Because if he's not, then he's just another guy that you would pick up. And if you need one of those guys to win you a football game, you're probably in a bad position to begin with anyway.
Yeah, that was always my premise was you paid Drew Lock to be the backup. There, you can take away everyone. I think had a very visceral reaction to him looking bad for a handful of reps in the second preseason game. Now it doesn't matter anymore. Sorry, first preseason game. It doesn't matter anymore. And the Giants weren't concerned about that either. You're just trying to get him some live reps. Like he is your number one backup. You can appreciate having DeVito in the system and wanting to develop quarterbacks. It's different than the Eli Manning era where those guys would never see the field because Eli was never hurt or never came off. Yes, okay, that's true. But Tommy DeVito, in this landscape of all the quarterbacks that are getting cut and let go, you're going to tell me that some other team is clamoring to claim him and put him on their 53-man roster? I just don't see it being the case. He's 26, going to be 27 years old. It's a nice story. It's nice, by the way, that Brian Dable has shown that you can develop a basically off-the-street quarterback for all intents and purposes and have anyone having this conversation. But I don't think anybody outside of the Giants bubble is having this type of conversation about Tommy DeVito. There are not other fan bases saying, hey, guys, if we play our cards right here, we could snag Tommy DeVito from the Giants and he could be our what? Like our backup? I just can't name a team that is saying they're going to put him in as their backup quarterback over any other number of options. So that was always my stance on it. It opens up another roster spot if you're Andy when we did our initial 53. It still keeps it the same for me, which is a bit of a bummer. I'll find other places to make some room. But it's a good reminder of, you watch these reps, it's all well and good, but it's not going to change the long-term outcome for this team. And it wouldn't matter if Daniel Jones and Drew Lock go down, Tommy DeVito, as you said, you're in a whole different world of hurt there, and you're pivoting to something completely different anyway at that point.
Yeah, I couldn't agree more with your premise on this, your
Thank you.
logic on it. And it's not a knock on Tommy DeVito, like
No,
the player.
fine.
Like he started games, he won games for the Giants last season. It's more of, can you get a similar production from another guy off the street? Yes, you're losing all of that mind share of him being in the system over the last year and change, but again, when you're talking about like allocation of resources, it just makes more sense to focus on other areas of the team.
Of course. So, in that vein, then coming out of this game as well, we're going to talk about a lot of guys that I think help themselves, whether it's just saying, hey, you're going to want to try to get me to your practice squad because I can be elevated on Sundays in a pinch. I think defensively, there's a number of names to look at there. Offensively, though, in front of Tommy DeVito, who, if you want to give him some credit for something in this game, it was, boy, you took a bludgeoning and just kept getting back up because they weren't bringing anybody else in. So, thank you so much for sacrificing yourself in this final preseason game. It was the offensive line, obviously. Now you get John Michael Schmitz. He has an ankle injury. He leaves the game. You also have Evan Neal. He leaves the game, ankle injury. Both of them came out and said they're totally fine. Okay. Suggested this a little bit over on X about like, man, you really have to keep an eye on John Michael Schmitz now, in terms of entering into the fray of was this pick a mistake territory. He's in his mid 20s. I don't believe about from a play standpoint, it's going to be a problem long term. But the problem is the reps aren't quite getting there as much as you want because of the injuries. So it was disappointing to see that coming into it. You mentioned, do you need to play John Michael Schmitz because you don't want to risk the injury going towards the regular season? Ultimately, a little tweak happens here. I will say, though, I think that the team premise here is we do need this guy to get reps, though. Like, he needs to be getting game reps. It feels like they are still concerned about what it's going to look like for him early in the season. And that's brutal because the Giants may have some winnable games, and John Michael Schmitz needs to be, one, healthy, and then two, also playing at a pretty consistent level.
Yeah, I gave myself a half pat on the back for that one because as I saw it happening and he gets rolled up, I'm like, this is what I'm talking. Why is he in there with no other starters? Like, and then also I'm watching him just get absolutely bludgeoned and getting
Right. So you're
pushed
like,
back and giving up multiple sacks. I'm like, oh, that's why they wanted him to play because he hasn't played well when he's been on the field. So it's
yeah.
it's a delicate balance, Adam, of like, we don't want him to get hurt, but he's got to put some good film out there because it hasn't looked good even when he's been healthy. And Adam, John Michael Schmitz had 2 out of the 11 plays that he was in there, snaps total, where he
Nice,
wasn't
nice, good sample size. 11 total snaps for this guy. No, because of the injury, right?
right. 11 snaps. He gets injured. 2 dropbacks. He didn't look good on either of them.
Yeah.
Obviously, pressure coming up the middle against DeVito. It was like, oh, credit to me for not wanting him to be out there, but also now I totally understand why he's out there because he has to figure out how to play a little bit better.
Sure.
That's concerning though, and I'm glad that you brought him up next after DeVito because I kind of go like, who's going to have the most impact on the New York Giants like week 1 and beyond?
Yeah, yeah.
John Michael Schmitz is a starter. He is a high draft pick. He is someone that you were expecting to see out there, get a couple good clean reps, push the line of scrimmage a little bit and get out of there. And instead, it kind of left a few more questions than answers given the injuries and the poor performance.
And then, I mean, and I agree with that, but he is a second round pick from just a year ago. The team believes in him. He's obviously going to be there, right? So the subplot to this, though, is then you look at a guy like Schlottman who plays, he gives you 29 reps, 20 in pass pro, and he's going to end up grading out as a 29.2 in pass protection. So you're like, okay, the maybe next in line in case of an injury. Let's not talk about, debating how they're going to look to start the season, just who's going to come in for reps. A player like Morrissey has kind of fallen off the table here in terms of the preseason discussion and training camp. He got 30 reps and looked pretty good. So, you're trying to figure out as well while talking about the number one and who's going to be the starter and being healthy and looking good, who's maybe behind them in case something comes up here. And that's a little bit of part of the theme for me too, as we turn our attention to Evan Neal as well. It's like injuries. These things happen. And I think a big part of watching the Jets game for me too was saying, yeah, when you're a higher level team and you have higher expectations, your depth is usually better. And you're talking about making really brutal decisions around who's going to make it or not. And sometimes when you're watching backups on backups, but it doesn't feel like your backups are on the same level as their backups, like that's a lot of what I was experiencing here. And it feels inevitable that we're going to have a discussion in season at some point where someone is going to go down on the offensive line and someone's going to have to fill in. Neal was in there, again, leaves with the ankle injury. Good reps and bad reps. Like I am going to hold my hand up and not be a convert over to your side or anyone else's side. I just think to the reality side of the Giants are going to keep Evan Neal. Obviously, there's a lot of dead cap money involved there. They're unwilling to let go of this yet. It's a Joe Shane pick. And I think it's okay. I think the mixed bag of reps actually allowed me to say, okay, he did some good things. Whether or not it's going inside, whether or not it's playing at guard, like all these different things. I don't know if I like any of the answers, but the offensive line and some of these players still leave us with a lot of questions about depth and make me assume there's cut candidates out there that Big Blue's going to look at.
Yeah, I mean, listen, you talked about Evan Neal. He got rolled up on the last play, and they asked him like, "How do you think it went?" He said it was fun to be out there. It was good to get back
Having
into the
fun.
mix of things. I'll tell you, it wasn't fun just watching him give up sacks when people just literally ran by him, and it was like, "What's happening? What's going on?"
Yeah, yeah.
He downplayed the ankle injury at
Yep.
him, and it was kind of weird. Like the Giants were like, "Yeah, he got rolled up. We just kind of put him off to the side." And his quote after the game was, and I quote, "First of all, I wasn't out with an ankle injury. I was only supposed to play 20 to 25 snaps. I came out on the 21st play that I was in. It just so happened that I got rolled up on the last play." It's like,
Okay.
okay, I guess he just doesn't want the injury prone moniker or his ankle to be following him around. And so he made sure to like have that as a statement. Well, you mentioned it. Some good reps, some really, really bad reps.
Yeah.
And the problem with Evan Neal has always been consistency. Can he
Yeah.
consistently be a guy that you can depend on? And right, go with the smart, tough, dependable, Joe Shane Dave's moniker. Right now, he has not been able to be that guy of dependability. And you just wonder if in a pinch, if he is the swing tackle on this team, or has
Yeah.
Joshua Zudu kind of, leapfrogged him in terms of who comes in next if Jermaine Illuminor goes down with an injury.
100%. And Zudu played in this and started, obviously, muddling. Yeah, the whole offensive line struggled a little bit. And I do give a little bit of grace to everybody on this line because you're playing a bunch of backups and mixing and matching a little bit. So the reps are going to be, a little more disjointed than you anticipate. That said, Jalen Mayfield also played okay over his 50 reps. Nothing really to be excited about. The last note across the offensive line for me is that Jake Kubas, who played 43 reps in this game, 28 pass blocking, 15 run blocking, graded out 72.9 overall, 79.2 pass, 67.7 in run block. And if we're talking about that 53, and I kicked out Evan Neal, so maybe it's Mayfield that comes out. I put Evan Neal back in, but I did have Kubas going through, and at least on merit, like if you talk about a young player enough times positively over all of camp and then through preseason games, and then you also look around at like where the health and condition of the depth is, maybe there's a world where he gets through here. Obviously, the risk reward of practice squad and not wanting to lose guys to the league.
Yeah, the one thing I will say is I will be curious to see how many offensive linemen they
Yes.
keep. Adam, you had
Yep.
mentioned before you had about 10 on
Yep.
yours. Last year they kept 9. I kept it pretty consistent with 9. It feels like Austin Schlottman is kind of fighting for one of those
Mhm.
back end roster spots. It feels like, obviously the regular offensive line is relatively safe. Are they going to keep anyone else? They already released Marcus McCathan, as we've mentioned before.
Yeah.
I'm curious to see what they do. It feels like to me the only question mark on my offensive line is whether they keep Austin Slotman or not.
Let's flip our attention into the wide receiver room here just briefly, because obviously you're talking about depth and we're talking about special teams value here as well. Isaiah McKenzie graded as the best offensive player by PFF in this game. However, that was based on him catching the ball because there was a lot of missteps when it came to the special teams room. You obviously had other players like veteran Allen Robinson, who again, 28 reps, like keeps grading out pretty good, keeps looking pretty good. I just like it just feel it almost feels guilty that you're like, yeah, good job. Anywho, and then you bring in the next player over top of them. But in all of this room here, special teams being such a high value, even a guy who I thought briefly in moments here, you could have seen a guy like Giles who had this leaping acrobatic hurdle down the sideline. And then every other touch after that was drop passes and clunky plays. That room from a depth and then also special teams value standpoint did not come out of this preseason game looking any more consistent or set beyond maybe saying, hey, some veterans are obviously easy to rely upon if you want to hold on to a fifth and sixth wide receiver.
Yeah, the wide receiver room is tough. Like I on my initial one kept Allen Robinson because when he's in there, he makes the catch as you mentioned. You're like, oh, okay, that works. But
Well, I kept Bryce
ultimately,
Ford Wheaton, and nobody's really going to be championing the fact that I made that decision. So I have highlighted him as someone who's probably not going to be carried over on the 53.
yeah, I have Bryce Ford Wheaton and Isaiah Hodgins on my practice squad. I think It feels like to me when you have a veteran like Allen Robinson, he either makes the 53 or he goes somewhere else and tries to latch on with a different team. He doesn't seem like a guy that wants to sit in the practice squad and then wait to get called up by the Giants of all teams. So it's kind of tough. Adam, I keep just going back to this idea of everyone telling me that Miles Boykin is completely safe. He is a special teams connoisseur guru. He is going to be on this roster, and it's just I
Is he
will
that good?
trust the judgment of other people. However, everything else that he brings to the table, you may as well not put him in the wide receiver room when you're talking about like being a
Right.
wide receiver, because if he gets on the field again, if he is someone that we need to contribute in the wide receiver room, then we're already in a bad spot to begin with.
100% waiting for Gunner to be healthy. If he was healthy, would it even matter? We'll be having this discussion about the return game as well. We're going to flip it over to the defensive side here in a minute, but just quickly, I didn't mention Marcellus Johnson on the offensive line. Played right guard, 30 reps in pass blocking, an 86.7. Absolute mess in a run grade, but I'm just saying he's at least another player who did put a good foot forward for himself, whatever choices the Giants are going to make. Let's flip it over defensively, because there were a lot of guys that did a lot of good for themselves in this game, I think, whether it's practice squad or pushing for the 53, including, yes, the man that is going to make me look like a genius, one Alex Johnson. We will dive into the D, all coming up next. All right, as we turn our attention now over to the defensive side of the football here coming out of this game, we can go ahead and just encapsulate all of the cuts that have been made to this point, by the way, because they're up to now 12 total players that they've released at the time of this recording. They also put in Joshua Kelly and Breon Borders were the additions. I think the last two that got added to the cut room, Christian Holmes, and then also Timmy Horn. These are all guys that have had NFL experience over the course of their careers. That put it up to 12. They're down now to 78 players in total. And if we look at the full group list here of the players that they let go of, Andy, there's nobody that really jumps out. It's back end running backs, a lot of guys that did not, in our minds, have any chance. We mentioned McCathan of being an impact player for this roster. A lot of the wide receivers, Giles got cut, Clayton Isabel, Kyler Bow, Ayir Asante, another player that had some opportunities in the course of that last preseason game. Tri Kaiser, that's basically it. I mean, we can go through the list, and no one jumps out at you there as far as guys that were let go and what it means for the practice squad.
No, and this is kind of what we expected. We're seeing a lot of guys that played well into the fourth quarter and the end of the game against the Jets that were there, and I think they kind of understand the situation where it's like you get to put some film out there. Maybe you can surprise. Maybe that another team can see what kind of tape you've got out there. But yeah, no one's surprising. The most touted person was obviously Marcus McCathan, just considering that he was a 5th-round pick of this regime. Obviously, that didn't work out for him. We mentioned before how they already have 9, maybe 10 guys that they're going to keep in that offensive line room. But the rest of them were just guys that were even just signed in the last couple of weeks just to get through preseason.
Yeah.
So I'd be surprised maybe one of them or two of them could make it to the practice squad. But over the next 24 to 48 hours, there's going to be a lot of guys that we're going to be looking at that will have practice squad potential for the Giants.
And by the way, Clayton Isabel is a guy that I think be good on the practice squad. He performed very well. He started in this game. He played 68 reps. He's no longer on the team. If he gets through the waivers, graded out as a 70.1. That's really tricky to look at exciting grades and then maybe not want to change your mind about it. First one for me that really jumped out here, though, it's a guy that you mentioned being on the practice squad when we did our 53, and that's Tomon Fox. I mean, listen, he played significant and real reps for the Giants a season ago. He played 48 reps in this game, graded out 79.9, best defensive grade on the field, 66.3 in run, 74.7 tackling, and 77.8 pass rush with a 60 coverage grade. And you may say that's the bad side. I'm like, well, it's not terrible by, linebacker, not necessarily your role standards. I thought that was a really good game for him. When you look in the linebacker room, I'm not saying make the 53, but it at least opens up the conversation of, hey, if we're not sure what other cuts are going to happen, there's worse players to maybe make the case for than a guy that we know has had reps for us on the field.
Yeah, the team has had a long look at him. Obviously, Tomon Fox is a guy that has done well for himself. I do think that he ultimately ends up on the practice squad. It feels like they're still wanting a little bit more from him. Keep in mind that there are some injuries in flux with guys like Micah McFadden, with Deontay Johnson that got injured. So depending on how the Giants maybe do some of the injury manipulation, he's a guy that maybe could stick for a little bit or just immediately go to the practice squad. But Adam, yeah, I think that was a good call up because he did the best that he could with the opportunity that was presented against the Jets on Saturday.
Yeah, I want to see KJ Cloyd make it there too. He popped a little bit, 90.6 in run defense. I won't go too much deeper. He's a practice squad player. But another guy that you've talked about and I've talked about, and I think this is a move up to the 53-man roster for you. I had him on my 53-man roster, and that was Benton Whitley, because he came out, played good ball defensively. There's a special team side of it too. But this was like in third preseason game, a lot of backups. Like if somebody catches your eye, that's usually a good sign, at least in the short term. Whitley is a more so even than Tomon Fox at this point, I think is the case of, hey, let's try to carry him over to the 53 and make a choice maybe after we get cut down.
Yeah, he's hair on fire, ultra aggressive. That's the way that I've seen him play. It's like you don't know if this is going to be his last snap. He doesn't know if it's going to be his last snap, so he's going to make the most of it. I love those types of players. Like to me, 4 tackles, 2 solo tackles, 1.5 sacks, a tackle for loss, 3 quarterback hits. Like Adam, he was doing everything that we, tongue in cheek, wish that Azeez Ojulari would do when he gets the reps on the field. And so that's why for me, I've also felt like if and when the Giants move Azeez Ojulari, he's a natural replacement in that edge rushing room. He just continues to put good film out there. I would be very happy to see him move up and make the 53. And I think that this last showing kind of is forcing the Giants' hand to say, I put enough good tape out there. Someone else might be able to claim me, but I'd rather be with the Giants. So hoping that Benton Whitley gets some good news over the next 24 hours.
And Ovia Gofo, he went out with an injury in this game after just a couple of reps. It was a real bummer. He's a young player, not about making your practice squad, but it's a handful of injuries that happened early in this game and throughout that are a bummer for any of these guys trying to make the cut. One note that I'll make here, so there's a lot of guys. David Long Jr. played well. It just doesn't seem like he's long for this roster necessarily, but hard to tell with the way that secondary looks right now. Guys like Darian Beavers, again, another muddling performance in that regard. Some good pass rushing, but a lot of bad. The fact that Jordan Riley played 50 reps in this game, like, I don't know if it perked your ears up or not, but even primary backups, I don't feel like should be overplaying themselves in games like these. And I had him as a cut. I think the Giants are still just in the muddling waters of what they want to truly do from a depth perspective there. Before we talk about just a couple other names, like, are there any guys who are guys that you're like, we'll see him on the roster, that now maybe after performance in a game like this, you go, oh, or maybe not. Like maybe they're actually a little bit lower on the totem pole. Did anyone jump out to you like that in this game?
No, I mean, look, listen, we saw Darnay Holmes get 78% of the reps. Obviously, he's been around the Giants for quite a while, came back on a non-guaranteed deal. It just feels like the writing is on the wall for Darnay Holmes in terms of making the 53.
Okay, let's go that direction right now. Special teams grades, because the one thing is, on defense, Darnay Holmes did not grade out very well. However, he had a 90.6 special teams grade. And I put him in on my initial 53 based on special teams value. And you're talking about, it's like Boykins or any of these other guys. Like, how many special teams guys are we keeping? Because when I first did my 53, I was like, well, I kept like 2 linebackers for special teams. I kept 2 wide receivers. I'm keeping an extra cornerback. Like, it was starting to pile up at a certain point. But that was a monster grade for me to him, playing that many reps on special teams and looking pretty good. Now he performed on a field goal block as well as the punt coverage, punt return. So he had a total reps of 29 on the defensive side, special team side of the ball. So significant reps and looks pretty good. Other notables, as we walk back to where we were just discussing, Benton Whitley, he graded out a 70.2 in his 45 reps. Like, that really matters for him. Darian Beavers, 55 on special teams. So again, my boy is struggling to hang on to this roster spot. But my new darling, Alex Johnson, he graded out 74.9 on special teams. And I thought that was very significant for him, who flashed some good plays, showed some rookie struggles, but he's another guy to me. It's like, who is showing that value when we look into the special teams room? Because that might be the difference depending on the position group you're in.
Alex Johnson played 100% of the defensive snaps for the Giants, and he played 62% of the special teams. So he played both.
It's a lot of reps, like point stop. Yeah, for a rookie.
They gave him every opportunity. And Adam, I gotta say, he looked good. He's another guy that I had him making the practice squad. When we did our projections, but every time they've asked him to do a little bit more and a little bit more and a little bit more, Alex Johnson has been up to the task. And so I like when you expand these roles for some of these guys, because you're like, oh, I saw little flashes here. Is it just that 1 out of every 20 reps he looks great, or can we expand his usage? And Alex Johnson getting 100% of the reps, he didn't look overwhelmed. And that is
Yeah.
the most important thing to me. I am curious to see how they decide on the defensive side of the ball. In the safety room, you feel like they're going to keep 4. Can they keep 5? Or is it really a battle between Javarius Owens and Alex Johnson for
Yeah.
the last spot in that safety room? I'm very curious to see. These are the decisions that get made. If you don't keep Tommy DeVito, maybe you can keep an extra guy in the secondary. Alex Johnson to me was someone I was like, I feel like maybe he's, gotten himself above the practice squad and maybe can sneak one of the last spots on the 53.
Yeah, and if you're me and I'm saying, oh, Darnay Holmes, which side it is the other, if they choose to go the Alex Johnson route and you let go of Darnay Holmes, even though it's in the, outside cornerback room or the slot, wherever you're trying to play him, you create a spot that way. Like you said, I didn't give up Tommy DeVito, but once I move off Bryce Ford Wheaton, I went ahead and I moved up Manhurts because it seems like they're going to carry forward with him. By the way, in this game, I thought that Jack Stoll, even though he's probably as close to being a bubble guy as you could consider, he played well for himself on special teams, grading out as a 73.4 in his just 15 reps, but he did get some reps in that category as well. So it's like you have all these kind of conversations going on. And ultimately, when you step back at the high level, you go, this to me is we had 90, we have to get to 53. And you do want to create a hierarchy of how soon do you want to let go of players, or how long do you want to try to stave off releasing player X, Y, or Z? As cuts happen around the league, you go, oh, all right, guess what? Benton Whitley or Tomon Fox or whoever, Alex Johnson, right? Like anyone that you look at and say, well, if we can go get this guy, we're going to have to sacrifice somewhere else. I find it interesting. It's 78 now, still have another 25 to go. Like it's fun to try to see who we think is as close to that 53 as possible and whether or not they can make that push coming off of a game like this on Saturday.
Yeah, and it's also why, when you're talking about making the 53, Joe Shane is calling all the other GMs right now, like, how's your
Yeah.
roster shaping up? Who are you thinking about releasing? If the Giants already know that they're going to be moving off a handful of people, maybe they can do a 7th round swap to be able to make sure that he comes to the Giants roster. And so the Giants' initial list of the 12 guys that they have recently cut probably didn't have much value around the league. I think Joe Shane felt pretty confident that he could get them back on waivers if he needed to.
Yeah.
But those, you mentioned about 25. Remember, about 14, 15, maybe with the international, you can get about almost 16 guys to the practice squad. So there's still this like finagling of like who we're going to try to get to the practice squad, who may have value for other teams, and what areas are other teams looking to maybe have a surplus of people that we can make a trade with. So it's fascinating that the Giants are still holding on because maybe there's still some deals to be had here.
Yeah, that's why you wait to see whether or not, as we saw, whether you're trading, swapping picks, and sending a player out. That's because you don't want to have to wait for a player to get cut and risk someone else getting him. With the Giants having the 6th pick in the waiver wire, you're also doing that double duty of, well, how do we want to set which cut player is our number one priority we'd like to get with the 6th? And if not him, what happens when we cycle around the next time and the third time around, right? So how much we see this roster shift is going to be interesting. Overall, coming out of Saturday and coming out of preseason, I will say this at a high level. And tomorrow we'll do like our final 53. The cut down is 4 p.m. We'll see how quickly that comes over the course of Monday, so we can maybe give our final predictions. But playing against teams like Houston and against teams like the New York Jets, who have high aspirations coming into the year, for me, I said it earlier, backups on backups, right? These later game reps, I think it does reveal depth, right? It does reveal the state of your team in that regard. And right now, the Giants still have a lot of questions to answer. We're not asking questions about who's the guy that maybe gets 3 or 4 reps in a game. There are positions on this team right now that need a guy that can give you 10 to 12 reps over the course of a game. Like, it really matters. We talk about guys give you 20 to 25% on the defensive or offensive side of the ball. So, and more so on defense, I would say at this point right now. So what happens with those roles, those battles, and how the Giants make these choices and the cut candidates that happen around the league is going to be fascinating to watch, because I do think we're going to have a real shift here over the next, 36 to 48 hours and go, okay, this is not only the roster, but this is the agenda for this team as we head towards the regular season, about how confident they might be that with a couple of tweaks, we can make this a more dominant unit on either side of the ball.
At the end of the day,
Yeah.
there's almost 70 reps that are still up for grabs for the cornerback 2 spot, Adam. Like,
Yeah.
think about that perspective. Like, there is a starting job that a player might be on another team right now that the Giants could claim and could see significant snaps against the Minnesota Vikings. It's just a reality, to your point, of where the depth currently is for the Giants. While we have gotten better in areas like wide receiver with Malik Neighbors, who we expect to be awesome, week one, there are just so many other areas across the defensive line and the cornerback room, and even a little bit in the secondary, that there's still so many questions rather than answers. And especially when you talk about the offensive line, while we have solved it with a band-aid of some veterans to be able to step in, it feels like the guys that we're trying to develop in Marcus McCathan, who's no longer here, Evan Neal, who looked, shaky at best, Azudu, who's looked overwhelmed at times. Adam, the depth is not there, and the Giants have some good top-end talent, but it feels like the margins are razor thin if anyone were to get hurt at any of these key areas where the Giants would be in a world of hurt.
I'll say it now so you know that I did when maybe it happens later. Leonard Taylor is a guy inside of the Jets room that is going to be a little bit tricky for them potentially to keep. Keep an eye on that name. I would pounce on him. And then Brendan Cordington for them, who you may have seen over on Saturday night, has had a very nice preseason when it comes to being a returner. And he also happens to be a cornerback. So maybe you try to do a little bit of double dip there. Young player as well. But all these names and so many more are going to be out there. We'll keep breaking it all down. And you can, for your part, get over to YouTube, enjoy us, turn on the alerts so you know when we're going live. Probably do another one of those midway through this week. And then, of course, on your podcast feeds, please go over, subscribe, leave that glowing 5-star review if it's available. Don't do nothing else, no less. 5 stars. And then you say so much, leave a good comment and support us on the feed, as it means a great deal as we try to grow that side of the OGP universe. Until the next time, though, we'll be breaking it all down again until the best times. As Andrew Makowitz would want, need, and demand the people know.
As always, let's go Big Blue.